Welcome back to Face the Nation. Matthew Pottinger was the Deputy National Security Advisor during the Trump administration and one of the first people inside the White House to sound the alarm about the coronavirus as it emerged last year. He had previously worked as a journalist in China and later a Marine Corps intelligence officer. Yesterday, he spoke with us in what he said was the spirit of sharing information about what he thinks still needs to be fixed within the government to deal with future pandemics.
The Chinese government was not sharing useful data with anyone in the world. The World Health Organization was parroting misinformation about this virus. They were claiming that it is not featuring significant human-to-human spread. They continued for weeks, even months, to claim that there was not a significant amount of asymptomatic spread. So that misled our public health experts. I was able to call doctors on the ground in China in late January, and they were already telling me, look, this thing spreads asymptomatically. Half of the cases or more are asymptomatic. That was a different story from what the Chinese government was telling.
Why is it that you were seeing and hearing things from doctors that the official health organizations were not getting?
We had about a dozen CDC officers in China. We have lots of CDC officers in the United States who deal with Chinese doctors. I had covered the SARS epidemic back in 2003 when I was living in China, writing for the Wall Street Journal. So I dusted off some of my old contacts and talked to Chinese doctors who had firsthand information about this pandemic, and they were very open. They said, yeah, this thing is not going to be like SARS 2003. It's going to be like the 1918 flu pandemic because it's spreading silently.
Was the administration being intentionally misled here, or was it a problem in terms of how our own public health officials consumed information?
We were a little bit too credulous. We were waiting to be fed information when the nature of that regime meant that we were not going to get that information. They had a strong incentive to mislead their own public and the rest of the world about the nature of this virus.
So the World Health Organization has said that COVID-19 was circulating in Wuhan, China in late 2019. Why didn't U.S. health officials or U.S. intelligence know earlier about this threat?
Well, U.S. intelligence wasn't focused on these kinds of questions. They were relying on the CDC. The problem was the Chinese Communist Party did not turn to their CDC to deal with this crisis. They turned to their military, and our CDC did not have relations established with the Chinese military. So the director of the Chinese CDC, based on public reporting, didn't know either. I mean, the Chinese CDC director did not know that this thing was circulating until the last day of December, which is incredible when you think about that. So it looks like the Chinese CDC to some extent was cut out because the Chinese Communist Party turned to its military to try to cover this thing up, to try to contain it until it was too late.
So the Biden administration and their National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said he has deep concerns about the World Health Organization's recent report and Chinese interference in it.
Look, the World Health Organization it made all sorts of untruthful or misinformed claims about this virus. So the WHO has a lot to answer for. When it comes to this investigation into the origins, unfortunately, we're seeing a panel that's been sent to China that is deeply conflicted. You have people who were hand-selected by the Chinese government. They had a veto over who could come in. U.S.
intelligence has said COVID, according to wide scientific consensus, was not man-made or genetically modified. You are not in any way alleging that it was, are you?
No. If you weigh the circumstantial evidence, the ledger on the side of an explanation that says that this resulted from some kind of human error, it far outweighs the side of the scale that says this was some natural outbreak. We have very strong reason to believe that the Chinese military was doing secret classified animal experiments in that same laboratory going all the way back to at least 2017. We have good reason to believe that there was an outbreak of flu-like illness among researchers working in the Wuhan Institute of Virology in the fall of 2019, but immediately before the first documented cases came to light.
So what you're referring to is some information that the State Department declassified right before the end of the Trump administration. And It said that you have reason to believe a COVID-like disease was circulating in autumn of 2019 in China. Is there evidence to back up that assessment?
There is, and that was a very carefully crafted statement, carefully crafted so as not to overstate the case that was making. The case it was making was for following up on these important leads.
Let's unpack some of what you were saying about the response here at home. It's been widely reported that you went into the Oval Office alongside National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien and told President Trump at the end of January that this would be the greatest national security threat that he ever faced. Did he understand the gravity of what you were saying at that time?
I think he did. That was something that Robert O'Brien told the president. To the president's credit, he decided to shut down travel from China.
Around that same time, though, the American public is being told that this is not a direct threat to them. I mean, Robert O'Brien was on Face the Nation saying exactly that.
Right now, there's no reason for Americans to panic. This is something that is a low risk, we think, in the U.S.
Is that what you thought at the time?
I thought that it was going to be potentially quite devastating. You could match that against quotes from a great number of public health experts in this country and abroad who were saying similar things, because we did not have hard evidence from the Chinese government that this thing was as dangerous as it was. So my view was let's prepare for the worst.
So in preparing for the worst inside the National Security Council, you started telling your staffers to wear masks. Yet the American public wasn't told definitively by the CDC to wear masks until April. Why?
Yeah. Remember, we misjudged the nature of this thing to think that it was like flu. One of the mistakes that followed on from that was the misjudgment by public health officials in this country to not advocate for the widespread generalized use of face coverings, cloth masks, surgical masks, and what have you. And that was, they feared shortages. Rightly. We'd put all of our mask-making supply chains into, guess where? China. And China was not making it easy for us to get access to additional supplies. So the CDC, that was an understandable thing to do, but it then made the mistake of conflating that with a set of advice that masks don't work effectively for the general public. That was a big mistake. Robert O'Brien and I weren't really willing to wait. And so we thought that the risk of an outbreak in the White House could be potentially devastating for the United States. That would create a national security risk. And so in early April, we started looking for supplies of masks. I ended up calling a foreign government. I called some senior officials in Taiwan just to ask for lessons learned. Taiwan had done better than probably any other country in the world at containing this virus. And so in the course of my conversation, I asked whether they had masks available. They agreed to send a shipment of 500,000 masks just a couple of days later. We put those masks into the national stockpile so they'd be available to frontline medical workers. I made sure that one box got delivered to the White House and was disseminated through the NSC and the White House Medical Unit.
So you knew enough to call a foreign government to ask for masks, but the American public wasn't being told yet to wear them, and the president wasn't wearing them. How do you make sense of that?
Yeah, it's frustrating. The mask misstep cost us dearly. It was the one tool that was widely available. At least homemade, cotton masks were widely available. It was the one effective, widely available tool that we had in the arsenal to deal with this. Public health officials were stuck in this sort of flu mentality. It was a grave misstep. The other really grave misstep And this is the one that I think we haven't rectified yet, and we've got to rectify. It has to do with the collection and analysis of critical data about how this virus is spreading in real time so that we can stay ahead of it, ensure that we don't get sucker punched by a new variant that could compromise the effectiveness of our vaccine. And this is an area where the Centers for Disease Control has stumbled very, very badly. I know that the new director, Dr. Walensky, is working hard on trying to get a far greater number of samples of this virus genetically sequenced, which is critical. Everyone should give as much support to her in that endeavor as possible. But there are cultural and organizational problems that still need to be rectified at the CDC if we're going to have a chance at success, both in bottling up this pandemic and also preventing the next one.
Inside the White House, the commander-in-chief himself got COVID. Matt, I mean, as a national security risk, did you ever look and say who exposed him and figure out how that happened?
I mean, it was a terrible day. I was overseas when we got the news that the president had been infected. It was scary.
But should there have been a real contact tracing effort within the White House to pin down the source of the outbreak? I mean, wasn't that a national security lapse?
You've got to remember at that moment, we had multiple cases. It may have had to do in part with the quality of the tests that we were using. There was a range of different tests that the White House was using to screen staff. Some were more effective than others, but I'm not certain that there was a failure to do that kind of contact tracing.
We'll be back in a moment with more of our interview. Stay with us. We want to go back to our conversation with former Deputy National Security Advisor Matt Pottinger. I've heard you on all the criticisms of the CDC, and you've highlighted some really specific areas for them to improve.
My view is that they should establish a new super body for pandemic preparedness and response within the CDC, probably move it from Atlanta into Washington, D.C., so that person who's in charge of that can also be attached to the White House.
So this is your prime reform to the CDC to prevent us from being sucker punched the next time.
That's one of them. The other one would be to create a Centers for Lessons Learned, like the military has for each of its service branches. You have a quasi-independent body of investigators who can go in and talk to anybody and everybody, collect lessons learned in real time, and then report. It's important that the director of the CDC and the other senior leadership actually listen to those reports and implement the lessons learned so that you've got a living organization that's learning. That is not, unfortunately, what the CDC is today. So the final thing really about the CDC is cultural. The CDC has developed over the years, even though it's got great talent in there and well-meaning people and a lot of expertise, it's developed an academic kind of mindset.
When you say the CDC, are you talking about Director Redfield?
Bob Redfield did the very best that he could with what he had. I'm talking about institutionally, in the belly of this institution, CDC was unwilling to partner with industrial labs to do tens of thousands of sequences so that you could actually see where this thing was going. They wanted to do it internally, and I think the reason for that is they want the data themselves so that they can publish. There's a very powerful incentive within CDC culture to partner with academic institutions rather than private institutions, and to collect data, submit for peer review articles that burnish your credentials. That's a very slow process. That's not the kind of incentive you want for dealing with a fast-moving pandemic.
How much of this is a question of if this should be handled by public health officials at all, or whether pandemics should be handed over to intelligence officials and handled like a national security threat?
The intelligence community does need to prioritize the collection of intelligence on these kinds of biothreats, rather than relying strictly on sister-to-sister relationships between our CDC and public health officials in other countries. But I don't think that the intelligence community is going to be able to to do more than that critical role of collecting and analyzing the information.
You're clearly thinking a lot of what could have been done differently. Do you think that the Trump administration did the best it could?
We had an impeachment, the first impeachment trial taking place as the coronavirus task force was meeting at a time when the country wasn't focused on this pandemic. People in the White House were, people at Health and Human Services and at the CDC were. I never encountered anyone at a senior level who was not deeply seized by the major weight of what we were facing. I do think that people did their best. I'm doing this hot wash, as I call it, in the spirit of trying to help understand that the narrative that it was all political failures at the top is not true. And so what I'm trying to bring to light here is that we have a deeper problem with the permanent government in how we are organized culturally and organizationally to deal with this pandemic and with future ones. I want us to succeed at getting better.
Matt Pottinger, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Margaret.
Our full interview is available on our website as well as on our Face the Nation podcast platform. We'll be back in a moment with former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. We think we've worked out that technical issue in Texas and can go now to Betsy Price, who's the mayor of Fort Worth. Good morning to you, Madam Mayor.
Good morning, Margaret. Let's hope we got this worked out. It's a perfect storm, no pun intended.
I'm glad we're talking now. Republicans have been in charge of Texas and the energy system by default for years now. After this week's blackouts, what do you think needs to change? Do you trust the state to manage the grid?
Well, I think that citizens are depending on their local leaders to insist that we get answers. And we're going to demand those answers of the state because the state runs the power grid. And we're the ones who've dealt with the issues on the ground. So, yeah, they're going to have to come up with solid answers and solutions.
But you believe the state needs to maintain control. I mean, I was looking into this, and the majority of the ERCOT board, the energy grid operator, the people on the board don't even live in the state of Texas. Are they in touch at all with what's going on? I mean, what's the problem here?
I certainly hope they're in touch, but it doesn't appear that way. And I think that's what surprised more people than anything is that they are not Texans who have not been living here. Most people didn't realize that, including myself. I didn't realize that. And, of course, now you've had the perfect storm, a statewide storm that's tested our system, and we just have to – we went through this 10 years ago. I know Mayor Turner said that, and the solutions were put on the table. But at the time, Texas was coming out of an economic downturn, and they just didn't want to spend the money to do it. Now our economy's strong, even with COVID, and we're going to have to do that.
The governor has said lawmakers should make sure that Texans themselves don't have to pay for this. But, I mean, let's be honest. The bill's got to go somewhere. Who do you expect to pay for it?
Well, we expect the state to step up and pay it. But, of course, the state is taxpayers. You and I fund government, and that's where it comes from. But the state does have a big rainy day fund, and they do have access to other sales tax and things that everybody shares a piece of. They're just going to have to take a real hard look at this and see what piece gets passed back directly to consumers and what piece they pick up on it.
So you would not support any kind of request to the federal government for increased aid to pick up the bill for this?
I think that we will go to the feds. It'll probably be a partner on this. We'll just have to work through it and see. Right now, for me, at the local level, we're focused on getting water and power back to our citizens. First and foremost, we're not playing politics here. We're in public service, and we got to get power, water, and food delivered to our citizens. But we're going to demand answers as we go along with this process. Do
you need more federal resources right now? I know President Biden has had this major disaster declaration. What do you need?
Well, FEMA has been very good about stepping up and providing water and some of the services. The state's provided some of the state guard to help us forest services. What we're going to need most, it will appear, is probably grants to help people who have broken pipes, whose homes are flooded. My own home is flooded, and I'll have insurance to help with that, but many people don't. And so at some point, we're going to have additional plumbers and resources, but there's going to have to be dollars follow that to help these folks who don't have the ability to pay this themselves. And that's going to have to come through the federal government.
And you can restart vaccinations when?
We believe we'll restart vaccinations probably tomorrow, at the very latest Tuesday morning early.
All right. Mayor Price, thank you for your time and good luck to you. We'll be right back. We want to bring back former FDA Commissioner, Pfizer board member, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, for a quick final word. Dr. Gottlieb, we've asked you in the past about what you think happened with the origins of this virus. I wonder what you took away from Matt Pottinger's insights there. He made some news.
Yeah, look, the most likely scenario here is that this came from nature, that this was bouncing back and forth between people and animals for a period of time and finally broke out. I think the lab leak theory, the fact that this could have been an accident out of that lab, is never going to be fully dispelled, and the WHO shouldn't walk away from that so easily. I think the one thing that Matt said in that interview, which is interesting and I think is new, is that the Chinese military was in that institute doing experiments with animals. That does create increased risk that this could have jumped from animals to people inside that laboratory.
Mm-hmm. And he detailed some of that. We're going to have our full interview online. I was pressing the current National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, on some of this. He didn't dispute the report. He also didn't address it. But the bottom line is that both administrations agree there needs to be more data shared by China. Specifically, what answers are needed?
Well, look, one thing that you'd want to look at is antibody tests in people who worked in that lab to see if they have prior exposure to COVID. Now, those tests may not show antibodies at this point because it's been some period of time, but that data is available and it wasn't shared with the WHO team. And so you'd want to see that data for sure. You'd want to see some of the source strains, the original strains, to see how this has evolved over time and try to get closer to the source of the initial outbreak.
Important to protect us against the next time. Dr. Gottlieb, thank you for your insights. And that is it for us today. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.